presentations to the board. The 14-15 assessment performance, Dr. Clark. That's next.
President McCarty, Board, Dr. Brown. Before David Holland presents the STAR and EOC results, I would like to first thank the Board and Dr. Brown for the support that we have received in terms of staff and needed resources to do this very difficult work. I'm just humbled by all the support that y'all have provided. The past few weeks, we have been very involved in data analysis. I can't begin to describe the meetings that we have had, not only with our staff, but with other neighboring districts. We just had one this afternoon where we had approximately 35 people from HEB, Keller, Eagle Mountain, Saginaw, and Birdville. We hear the same comments and concerns expressed, particularly with the reading assessment. As we examined our data, we certainly found areas to celebrate, and Mr. Holland will share those with you tonight. However, there are some areas where we have engaged in some very specific and intentional conversations with curriculum coordinators, coaches, and even a group of district-level staff from our neighboring districts. In all of these conversations, our goal was to better understand the nature of this, what I call this generation of assessments. These assessments are very different from what we have been accustomed to since 1980 through the progression of all of the assessments that we've had. We have wanted to examine curriculum documents, to look at our practice, and to ask ourselves, where are we maybe missing it in terms of trying to really have our students perform at higher levels. What we are learning is that our instructional practice must become what we are calling much more sensitive to the cognitive requirements of these assessments. In other words, we are finding that the rigor of the assessments are outpacing the rigor of the instruction, especially as we look at elementary level. And this is true throughout the state, and we've also found that it is true throughout the nation, that particularly as we are assessing reading, that we are finding that we are kind of flatlining reading across the nation. The good news, though, is that we are above the state in all areas of our performance. However, that is not our goal. Our goal is to be at the top of our comparison group. So as you listen to this report, let me assure you that we have been very busy developing a plan that will address literacy, mathematics, and social studies. And social studies, again, is really a reading test. These plans will be specific for the district and specific for identified campuses. As we work with campuses, we will provide the support that is needed, but we will also be specific about the work that must be done. Campuses will also need to understand that we will be monitoring the implementation of these plans and noting progress towards identified benchmarks that we will be communicating. I think it is critical that we provide the professional development for our teachers, as well as instructional coaching and support that is needed to make the shift in teaching that has to occur. In summary, the work is extremely difficult and complex. Our teachers are working hard. However, the target can't be elusive. Teachers need to have much clarity about the intricacies of these new assessments and make the necessary instructional adjustments that will ensure student learning. What we now have to do is continue the work that we have started, monitor very closely, and provide ongoing support to our teachers. Again, I want to thank you for the support that you have given, because without that, we would not be where we are tonight. So thank you. And David, you can start.
President McCarty, members of the board, members of cabinet, I'll briefly review with you some of our assessment results, mainly from our state assessment, as well as some other assessment data of interest in the district. As Dr. Clark said, one of the things that we've been challenged with our new assessment is the rigor. And these data I've shared in the past with you. We have multiple years of data based upon our 3 state assessments since the advent of TOS back in 1994 and TAX, and then with STAR since 2012. You can see reading and ELA performance over time averaged across all grade levels for both the state and Birdville ISD. You can see also that the standard upon which these data are based is our recommended standard. And as you're probably aware, when we started the STAR program, we started at a lower passing standard for our tests, and that standard is actually still in place all the way through 2015. Thanks to the commissioner last August, he continued that for another year and actually changed the structure. So instead of getting to the recommended standard as originally planned in 2016, he extended that all the way out to 2022. So these are the standards by which we will be held in 2022. But in keeping with the idea that these standards represent where students need to be in order to demonstrate success at the next level and when they leave high school, I've kept the performance standards the same. As you can see here, through TOS and TAX, we had quite a good increase and good trajectory after the advent of the test. Once we had an opportunity to see the test, we did much better on those assessments, not so much with STAR. So while we have separated ourselves some from the state, you'll notice that especially the state data seem to be already flattening out overall in reading across all of those levels. So as Dr. Clark alluded to, these are new generations of assessments that are assessing things that you can't just look at the test and say, oh, I need to teach it that way. Now we're asking students to think at very high levels, and it's very difficult to guess what's going to be on the next test. And so those are the challenges really in front of us. Now just to review, just to review the state assessment system for you, you'll recall we have the STAR assessment in grades 3 through 8 and also 5 end-of-course exams. There are some changes to the system this year. Last year we had a test called the STAR-M test, which was based on a modified curriculum for our special education students. The state took that test away because of federal requirements, and they replaced it with a test called STAR-A, which is essentially exactly the same test as STAR with the same questions, exactly the same test. It just allows some additional accommodations for students, and it's an online assessment. So our students who in the past had taken STAR-M, now we had to make a decision, either give them the regular STAR or give them this new online assessment that had basically been untried in the past. Also, our math curriculum was tested now. A new math curriculum was put in place. They took learning standards from higher grade levels and pushed them down. So they would take 6th grade standards and put them down to 4th grade. And so the big challenge this year was to realign our curriculum with the new set of standards. And so they have the tests this spring were aligned with the new standards, and so there were a brand new set of tests, and we do not currently have results for the tests because they will not set the passing standards for the math tests in grades 3 through 8 until August. So we won't have results for math until September. That's when they're promising those to us now. We still have some students taking the exit level TAX test. So we have some 11th and 12th graders who took TAX this past spring in order to meet graduation requirements. And then, of course, we have the TELPAS assessment, which is for our English language learners. And you'll recall that they're assessed in 4 different domains: listening, speaking, writing, and reading. And each student receives a rating of beginning, intermediate, advanced, and advanced high in those 4 areas, plus an overall composite score. So that's the bulk of our state assessment program. So very briefly, just to give some tangible evidence of some of the things Dr. Clark's been talking about, I've illustrated the state performance at the current passing standard, which is called the Level 2 Phase 1 standard, over the past 4 years, as well as Birdville ISD. Fortunately, in grades 3, 4, and 5 were fairly well above the state. However, you can notice that the performance has not increased considerably over time. 6th grade reading, we're 1 point ahead of the state in 2015. Grades 7 and 8, you can see for the most part our performance parallels where the state is. So the test seems to vary from year to year a little bit in terms of the difficulty, and our district, while there's some separation between us and the state, our performance over time seems to be fairly well mimicking the direction of the state. English 1 and English 2, those were new tests in 2014, so we only have 2 years of data for those two assessments. Moving on to the writing assessment, that's administered in grades 4 and grade 7, and you can see again the same sort of flat performance over time, and our performance as a district for the most part mimicking the state. Science, if I could point to an area, I would say our science performance in grades 5 and grade 8 are really the shining star in terms of the number of points ahead of the state. You'll notice that we're about 7 points ahead of the state in both of those grade levels in 2015. Biology has a relatively low passing standard. Students need 37% of the items correct on the test in order to pass. And so we have very high passing rates for those tests right up near the top. Now, the standards are due to raise in 2016. So we had been in phase 1 for the first 4 years. Now we're going to go up to phase 2. So that's an increase of 1/2 of a standard deviation below the mean. And so that's one of the other challenges that we'll have ahead of us. Social studies, as Dr. Clark mentioned, is an area of some concern, especially in the 8th grade. We had some flat performance this past year, while at the state level they had a little bump. And that test we know is in part based upon reading skills of students. You have to read the test. There's a lot of documents and a lot of information that students need to process. So literacy of students has an effect on performance in areas like social studies. Now, mathematics, right now we only have some raw scores. So we have raw scores for all of our students, and so we would like to compare our performance against our neighbors here in Northeast Tarrant County. And so here you can see Eagle Mountain, Saginaw, Birdville, Keller, and HEB. And I've ordered these according to the level of performance. Now, this is the mean raw score. So the average raw score for each of these districts over time. So you can see in grades 3 and grade 4 and grade 5, we are basically on average one raw score point behind HEB or Keller, depending on the grade level.
Dr. Holland,
yes.
Explain to me what a raw score is as opposed to
if
a
there's
well-coached
40 items
score.
on the test, a student gets 36 of the 40 items correct. That's their raw score. How many items they got correct on the test is their raw score. Yeah, no, it's not a percent. It's just, yes, the number of items. And then grade 6, actually we're 3 points behind it, and probably of all the grade levels in mathematics, that's probably the biggest concern amongst all of those in grades 3 through 8. And then we're, again, 1 or 2 points away from whoever happens to be leading the pack in that particular grade level. Now, our SSI program, you recall that in grades 5 and 8, students are required to pass the reading and the mathematics test in order to be promoted to the next grade level. Since the mathematics test does not have standards currently, mathematics is not part of SSI in 2015. However, reading is. In fact, on Tuesday this week, our 5th and 8th graders who still need to pass the test were tested after 11 or 12 days of instruction in the summer, and so those students would need to pass that third time in order to be able to be promoted to either grade 9 or grade 6, depending on their current grade level. So here you can see the performance in the primary administration in April, the percentage of students. Again, I want to remind the board that there's a considerable number of students who last year were not required to meet these requirements because they were Star M students, our special education students. Now these students are required to meet these SSI requirements. The ARD committee can make a decision about those students, but nonetheless their performance is reflected here in these results. So it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison between 2014 and 2015. So we can see somewhere around 80% or a little bit less in 2015 in grade 5 and grade 8 passed the first administration. Then whoever didn't pass was retested in May, and you can see a little less than half of the students who retested in May are there. And then looking at the cumulative overall passing rate, which is what will be used in the accountability system coming up in August, are represented at the bottom. Those are the overall cumulative rates. Now, as far as end of course exam, we present here for you the percentage of students that passed the test. I also think it's interesting to know how many students are actually being tested. So at the top of the bar, I've put the number of students because I think this is important. So like for Algebra 1, for example, we had 154 students who retested in spring of 2014, and then 134 who retested in 2015. So that was about the same number of students. But with biology, we nearly cut the number of retesters in half. So the fewer retesters you have, the better your program's working to get kids where they need to be in order to be able to walk the stage and pass all of their tests. The biggest bang really for the buck here was in English 1. So last year at this time, I was telling you that we had 508 students who retested. However, in this past spring, we only had 210 of our English 1 students that had to take the retest. All right, and so same thing, we see the same sort of trend in English 2. U.S. history, we only had 30 students who had to take the retest. And there was no retesting going on in 2014 because that's administered to juniors, and that pretty much was the first time that test was administered. So that gives you an idea of our performance on the retesting as compared to the state. Now, in looking at the Telus results, again, you recall there's 4 different areas in which they're assessed: listening, speaking, writing, and reading. In 2014, the state raised the standard on the writing test, making it more difficult for students to score higher on the test. And these show the percentage of students that scored the highest that they can. That's advanced high. And again, I want to remind the board that this is a very moving target because as students are advanced high, they get moved out of ELL status. So your best performing students get taken off the radar screen, but overall you can see performance over time in listening, speaking, and writing have continued to improve, and our composite score is a little drop this year in reading for our ELL students in grades 2 through 12. Now, some data was released by the College Board late in the fall last year, and I wanted to bring this forward because as you know, we administer AP exams, and the board has been very kind to provide funding for all of our students who are taking AP courses to test. So now we have a lot of trend data here, and you can see the last 5 years. So all of this is very positive about the performance of our students on the AP exam. First of all, these are the number of students who took 1 or more tests. So you can see from 2010 to 2014, we went from 1,179 to over 1,400 students who took 1 or more AP exams. So that means that we've increased the participation in the program. This is in terms of tests. So we went up all the way to 2,730 tests in 2014. Again, this is the 14 data. And so that tells you not only are more kids participating, but we're taking more tests overall. This is the important part here because scores of 3 or higher on AP can lead to college credit. Okay? And in fact, there was legislation that was just recently signed into law that basically says that colleges and universities in Texas have to give them credit unless they can provide strong evidence that they shouldn't do so. Okay, so it's unknown right now exactly how that's going to pan out, but some schools in the past they say, well, unless you score a 5, we're not going to give you credit. Well, now there's a law in the books that says if they score a 3 on AP, that these colleges and universities need to give these students credit. So that's a very positive carrot out there for students to get them to score. Yes? Is that for private schools? I believe it's just the state schools. State public schools, yeah.
Or you want to know if it's retroactive as well?
Yeah.
So this is very positive here. These are the number of students over time who scored 3 or higher on at least 1 exam. Okay, so you can see that that's increased by almost 300 students in the last 5 years. And then finally, this last one is the percentage of students who scored 3 or higher on at least 1 test. Now that looks fairly modest, but you need to have something to compare it against. So this last chart that I have for you looks at that same graph of the percentage of students scoring 3 or higher versus the state in red and the nation. So you can see in 2010 we were actually below the state. And then in the last 5 years, what we did is we've almost now caught up to the nation. Okay, so that is powerful data that tells us that what we're doing to improve our AP program and to continue to support it is having an impact not only on our students directly, but also indirectly on their parents, because it's going to reduce the amount of money that they have to pay for college. Again, I want to just kind of thank the board for continuing their support for the AP program and testing our students. Okay, so just to kind of wrap this up, celebrations, we did exceed the state on all STAR tests where results are available. Remember, there's a big question mark about mathematics that's out there still, but on those other subject areas, we were above the state. Fewer students are being required to retest on EOC. That means that our remediation program is being effective to get them to pass the test for the July and December testing. TELPAS performance continued to increase in listening, speaking, and our composite scores. And AP performance really is an all-time high in Birdville ISD in terms of the number of students getting 3 or higher and the percentage of students who are tested getting 3 or higher. Our challenges for the upcoming year, math in grades 3 through 8 will not count on the accountability system this year as things currently are. However, next year it's likely that it will count on that. So we'll continue to move our curriculum forward to get kids prepared for that test. Star A and Star Alt will not count on the accountability system in 2015, but they likely will count next year. Increasing STAR performance standards. As I mentioned before, we're going from phase 1 to phase 2 in terms of the performance standards on the test. And then finally, what we did for grades 3 through 8 math this year by implementing new standards, they're doing that next year for Algebra 1. Okay, so that's going to be another challenge for our students taking algebra. That's all I have. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Clark.
We're happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Joe.
Just very quickly on the Star M versus Star A, is it accurate to say that it's irrelevant as to the level of disability of the student, that they still have to take either the Star or Star A, and then their passing or failing is still compared to students that just take the Star as to whether they pass or fail? ARD has nothing to do with it? Or you said something about the ARD group may have some, and I didn't know what you meant.
And what I was referring to was the 5th and 8th grade in terms of their the SSI.
Oh, that's just the SSI.
That's the SSI.
And
That's
it
correct.
could have something to do with ARD about their graduation.
And graduation. But the idea when we used to have Star M for a student that had disability, that some might consider that more appropriate, that those days are gone, and now they'll need to either take the Star.
That's correct.
Yes, the
Star
feds
A.
determined that we were out of compliance with administering that particular test. And so as part of the state's proposal for their title funding, what the feds said is that we have to get rid of the Star M test. And so what they did is they put in place the Star A, but it's a very different test. As an example, Star M had only 3 answer choices on it, had simplified language, it was a shorter test, and it was based on modified curriculum standards.
So a child with disability in 6th grade every kid will take the same test, except one may take it online and one may take it in person? Is that
Right, and there's one exception to that. Those are the students with the lowest cognitive ability for whom a pencil and paper test is not an appropriate assessment, and they would take the Star Alt 2 test.
Okay.
Which is online.
No, that one's not.
No,
The
Star
A is
Alt is
online.
not, yeah. The
Star
Star
A
A is online. Star Alt is still administered by the teacher. By the teacher.
Any other questions? So let me ask you a question. Do we know from when we look at the state numbers, how many what's the percent concentration of kids with disabilities versus what our percent is that are taking the test, to make it comparative, from one way or the other? Because
Yes,
Yeah.
those data are available through the state reports. I didn't include them here, and you can do that, but it tells you whether students are coded as special education or not, but
Okay.
it does not get down to the level of the specific disability. So for example, we might have students who are receiving speech services only, and so they may not necessarily have a cognitive disability, could be a physical disability or something else that allows them to have a coding of special education. So it really doesn't tell us who the kids are, what their abilities were, or disabilities were, but it does tell us whether they are coded as special ed or not.
Would we assume, when we look at it, would it be fair to assume that the concentration within the percentages could be aggregated and they would mirror each other in data sets?
You could, possibly, yes. Now, there's another wrinkle to it that I didn't bring in, and that is that with the STAR A test, we can actually test our students who are coded as 504, they have a disability, but they're not coded as special education per se. So our dyslexic students, and in fact, those students perform very well on the STAR A assessment, which it's probably an appropriate assessment for them. One of the challenges for this online assessment of STAR A is that it has a lot of things inside there that the students can play with to change what happens. For example, on a math test, they can roll over a word and it'll read it to them out loud. Okay?
Yeah.
So it'll read it to them. So if they have a disability in reading, but not necessarily mathematics, it'll help them with that. Or they can put red overlays over the top of it so they can read it better on the screen.
Yeah.
One of the concerns is that we do not have a way to practice that in the classroom.
Sure.
So there's no test that's out there that we can't administer tests that way, but when the state test comes along, you've got this system, and so the kids don't have experience with it, and so many people were concerned about putting kids on a test that they didn't have any experience with in the classroom or chances to practice on other tests.
Yeah, you actually answered my next question, which is, when is it that the test is ahead of our ability to keep the teachers informed to be able to teach during a year that we just dramatically changed everything? Like, I mean, if you're getting ready for next year, how do you know?
I think this year we really saw that. And the test was ahead of what our teachers really were aware of. That was true in mathematics, and it was certainly true with testing our special ed. We were making recommendations through the ARD committee, trying to decide what is the most appropriate test for for each student, and realizing that some of our special ed and 504 students are very easily distracted. So going online and taking a test that have all these little things that they could manipulate, we didn't know if that was the best thing to do or to let them go ahead and try the regular STAR. So we really were making decisions in absence of some really good information because we had no familiarity with what we were going to see.
Okay. Yeah. No, I believe me, thinking mathematically about all this, I'm just sitting there going, boy, these two data set groups from year to year doesn't matter, and does it even matter against the state numbers, and does it matter against neighboring districts? Because we're kind of known for accepting and working with 504 and special ed much better than our neighboring districts that we get the kids from because they do a poor job, at which when you're making comparisons, that seems to disadvantage us in making comparisons then at that point. And without being able to pull it out, I mean, comfortable, how do you know that?
Well, you don't know if you're comparing the same thing.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because I had a parent bring me the letter they got from the child's math test for 3 through 8 that said the reason there's only the raw scores is because we don't know what good is. And I mean, literally, if you haven't seen this, it's in all of their packets, but it says when we know you took it in spring, and we're going to let you know in summer whether it was passing or not, which means to me they're going to take the scores and force rank them backwards and then say this is who passed and this is who didn't because we're going to base it on that versus everybody could have done a good job and they all passed, right? I mean, I struggle with reading things like this and thinking I've got anything I'm measuring.
Well, I think if we think that the passing standards on our test are not motivated by factors other than psychometrics and learning, then we're a little confused about how the system works.
Okay.
Just some comments regarding, over the last several weeks, there's been a pretty large group of mid to large school superintendents that have been meeting and working with some of the most knowledgeable people across the state to try to gain information to help explain some of the trends that we're seeing. This is unusual. In year 3, 4 of an assessment back in years past, you didn't see the state, which is a huge database. Statistically, that's very significant. You know, when we drop 2%, it could be insignificant. But if the state drops 2%, that's a lot of kids. We're a large state. We test a lot of kids. So when that drops 2 years in a row, a lot of questions have come up. We did a pretty thorough analysis. I spent 2 days in the Woodlands with this group of 35 superintendents with the most knowledgeable people in each of these areas, in finance, policy, and assessment. So we really examined deeply by going to the people who actually worked with the state in developing the test, writing the items, setting what the standards were going to be, including teachers and administrators who worked and had all the knowledge. So we're trying to glean. And what came out of it is in reading, writing, and English 1 and 2, it's obvious there's something going on with the test. I think that's what's led to Pearson no longer having the contract for the state assessments, but now ETS does. There's just a belief that something's going on with the standards. Now, you say that out loud, people go, "Oh, you're just complaining. You're not doing well, and you're complaining." But it's not a district doing it; it's a state trend. So there's something happening with reading, writing, when you can't tell from the writing assessment what you're not good at in writing if you don't pass, and they can't tell you. It's these kind of things that have caused a lot of questions, concern on the part of TEA and Pearson. So the ETS contractor was there. He was listening intently as we spent a few hours really delving into this, giving our feedback, some of the things that just didn't make sense, things we wanted to see in the future, and obviously from trends, something's going on. We've got districts like Highland Park and Northwest testified. We know their kids can write. Kids from Highland Park can write, and their writing scores are pretty horrific. So it's like, when you say Michael Jordan's not good at basketball, we've got a problem. So that's just whether something's wrong here. So that's part of this issue that we've never had before. We're still tackling it. We're going to do everything we can of the things we do control. We don't control that. But we acknowledge there's some things in writing throughout our system, in reading, and some of our scores that we're going to tackle head on, and we're going to control the things and improve the things that we can. That's what we're committed to. So just thanks to the board, to all our people and the curriculum instruction staff, our principals who lead this work, our teachers who are doing the work. Thank you for the courageous leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you.